こんなのやだ。髪の毛が消え去ってゆく。ハゲパゲハゲパゲハゲハー。熱いお餅、熱いお餅。あなたは髪の毛ありますか？ありますか？ありますか？こんなのやだ。ハゲパゲハゲパゲハゲハゲハゲハゲハゲハゲハゲパゲハゲパゲハゲハゲ。あなたは髪の毛ありますか？ありますか？ハゲハゲこんなにやだ。なんだこりゃ、誰じゃこりゃ。うちの偽物出てきた。うちの偽物出てきた。これ絶対オレオ、あ、違うや。オレオや、これ。偽物じゃない。ややこしい。ボレで、おーってややこしいやん、めっちゃ。なんでそんなややこしいことしたん俺は。ちょっと待ってね。授業のズームに入って、授業のズームがね、ちょっと地味にわかんないんだよ。ありますか？ありますか？こんなのやだ。これやんなきゃいけない。どれやろ？髪の毛ありますか？ありますか？ありますか？頭から離れないんだけど、この曲が。これやな。これがリンクで、ちょっと待って、マジで情報量多くなるんだよ。今日の配信。やばいね。本当に。ガチめにやばい。すごいことになる。英語しか聞こえんくなるから、頑張ってみんな。みんなが頑張って。理解できるように頑張ってください、皆さん。地に入りも。怖え。マジで怖い。本当に怖い。はい、先生入ります。大丈夫かな。
Each person has up to 3 minutes. You don't have to use it all, but each of you will have.
おはよう、その人が。
And same with closers. Yep, good question.
And how long is the argumentative section?
Well, I'll stop that at about, let's see, I want to make sure we have about 30 minutes to do a second vote and then a debrief. And so we end at 3:15, so about, what does that make it, 2:45? Yeah. So right around 2:45, and then we'll head into closing statements, and then we'll debrief, we'll vote again, and have a nice discussion.
怖いっす。
Yep, perfect.
ディベートやね、ディベート。怖いんやけど、マジで。ディベート好きじゃないよ。
Any other questions? Any good ones?
本当に。
So each opener or closer has up to 3 minutes.
ノラの声聞こえても答えれない。
If either the openers or the closers have less than, they spend a little bit more than producers still count.
ありがとうございますって言われた。配信でありがとうございますって言われたの。なんだけど
いや、俺もらうよ。
俺生まれて初めて人にありがとうって言われたわ。いや、犬にはあるけど、ありがとうって言われたの。
犬逆に言わんか。
あ、C 組 JXG。何これ？オツ？タツ？コナミンが入室しました。コナミンさんいらっしゃい。やっぱみんな学校前になると入りやすくなるのかな。
いや、多分。
でも、よし、じゃあいい。
枠が少ないからじゃないですか。
枠？
配信者。
あ、そういうことね。だから仕方ねえから俺みたいな。
そう。お前はもう後でいいよ、みたいな。お前はもう2
はい。
仕方ないな、みたいな。言っちゃって。
結果そこオンになってるこれ。
ありがとう。じゃあこそ、あと何したら仕事。
これ終わったら仕事。
これは
仕事行くかな。
うわぁ、マジか頑張って。
いってらっしゃい。
いやー、お疲れ様です。頑張ってもらって。
待って、頑張った。最悪。
バカバ
おチュニだー。4番おチュニだ
ー。4番さんはどこで死ぬ？
はい、俺おチュニだ
蘇生しはもう。
いや、俺さ。
武器は M4 です。何？
リオさん、あ、召された。救助してた。左がもう。ブンブン。めっちゃ甘えてたから抜けるかな。全然抜けんかった。頑張って。
ラム君。
右監督あんのこれ。怖いんだけど。
だって右誰もおらんで。
展開いるよ、だって。無理。
マジ？
この展開の一番全くわかりません。
おった、ここ。
やった。
展開
こっち。
展開やった。
右箱前詰めてる。
詰めるのありがとう。
出るよ。
ごめん。いやー、取ればよかった。ごめん。4番さん。
どっち？右？
いや、箱裏。右はやった。俺アンチ入ってるから90来て。
91やって。
もう右からは来ないって。あ、来た。バカだこいつ。アンチ外から来てる。
ナイス。あと奥や。
ポックンミョンさんいらっしゃい。僕料理みたい。はい。最悪なんだけど。安心切れた。待って。
リオンさんはいつ声やめるん？
いや、もう一回配信するけどね、俺は。
髪切りなんでにくん。
paper, scissors?
Yeah, we can rock, paper, scissors.
It could be fun.
あ、みおさん来てくれるやん。ごめん、間違えて俺、
It could be
配
so
信切っちゃった。
Tina and Alfredo, you're the starter, so you just do and show us your
Alright. Rock, paper, scissors.
あれ、声が、声
Alright. Rock,
えーい
scissors. Okay.
キル僕やん。てるさん。
And I'm gonna start the 3 minutes, and so
僕が
when
めっ
my,
ちゃ、
my phone starts to ding,
いや、
I'll let you know.
400人キル速が収まらも
See
ない
it
か
and
ら。
hear it, and know that just finish
声
up
が
that
スロー
bit.
モーションにな
キル速
ってるって。
に関して、
Just lose, Stan?
中距離だけやから、キル速が関係あるの。
Oh, okay, you just moved. I don't know. Okay. Somebody got bumped, but okay. Let me just get my timer set up.
リオンさんキルパクし
Your
た。
statement, if you do happen to be at 3 minutes, finish what you're saying, but don't start it.
最低。僕嫌いです、そういう人は。
Timer. Okay. I am ready when you are.
リオンさんのキルパクしたろ。
So I'm actually on the side of the pros. So I'm going to be arguing that esports should be considered sports.
なんで
So I just first wanted to go over the definition of
あ、
sports.
いい。いい。
ローローローローローローロ
So in class
いや、
we
もう
learned
これは
that
仕方がないとしか言いようがないですね。
esports
は
are actually extremely competitive. Many tournaments have
ー。
い。継承してもらう。
勝ちから。
はい。
prize money,
あざ
いいよ
ーす。
ー。面白く
they
ない
also
な。
have to be institutionalized.
うん。なんで打った？
レントさんいらっしゃい。ちょっとやばいよ、この状況。
じゃあもう声放置するわ。
あと2枚。
They actually have to
いけるいける。
みんなこれ聞いとき。
リオンさん、勝てるよ。
So
リオンさんならいけるさ、きっ
any
と。
sort of game, you need some sort of gaming device. PlayStation, Xbox, anything like
やら
that.
かしてる
And
ね。
lots of esports organizations actually started building
いや、テロさん、
team
いるよ。
facilities
豆
as
腐豆
well.
腐。
That's where players can actually
豆
come
腐
and
豆腐、シャ
train,
リ。
go over strategy and everything like that for the big tournaments. Now they also have to
あ
include
れ、ラス
physical
トでしょ。
activity and
ラスト、
skill.
ラスト。
Video games actually involve a high degree of skill and creativity, and they rely on developing motor skills in order to be successful. And looking at the physical activity aspects, esports have similar exertion levels as many traditional sports such as archery, golf, bowling, racing, and nobody really optimized for those sports. The most important thing about the definition of sports, however, is that the definition is constantly changing. I think this is particularly important because esports is a growing trend, especially in younger populations.
すげえ楽じゃん。
Millennium Z or Generation Z and millennials in particular increase interest in this sport. So it's only right to evolve the definition of sports to include this. In addition to that, I wanted to talk about the limited barriers of entry for esports compared to traditional sports. Many households in the U.S. actually have computers and have access to broadband internet. Most games that are played competitively are actually optimized for low-end computers, and there's a myriad of games to actually partake in, just like there are a myriad of different sports. These sports or these games include both individual and team games, and there's also different levels of competition. You have high school, college, university, and amateur leagues, and professional leagues as well. And you also have schools that offer programs and scholarships for esport athletes as well. And that concludes my points.
Okay. We'll pass the torch to Alfredo.
Alright. Hello, my name is Alfredo, and I'm against esports being considered sport. So I'd also like to go over the definition of sports. An activity involving physical exertion and skill in which an individual or team competes against another or others for entertainment. So, I do agree that esports involves a great amount of skill and it is a competition, but I would like to focus on the physical aspect of the definition. Or the physical exertion part of the definition. So, physical exertion is the activity of exerting your muscles in various ways to keep fit. Sitting down and minor hand movements in no way can be described as exerting your muscles to keep fit. Traditional sports require the athletes to follow strict workout regimens to be able to perform at the highest level. For gaming, routines are optional and most of the time implemented to counteract any of the negative health effects that gaming can have. Sitting in front of a screen for up to 10 hours at a time sounds more like a leisure activity, such as watching TV or to the movies, or similar to office work. Even the injuries that come from esports are similar to the injuries that office workers get, such as eye strain, carpal tunnel, and back pain. And like I previously stated, there's great skill involved to become a professional gamer, but categorically, esports cannot be defined as a sport. Thank you.
And we head over to Annette.
Hello, my name is Annette, and I'm on the pro side for esports. And starting off with the popularity in esports, in our society today, we know esports has constantly increasing in popularity, similar to numbers in traditional sports. For example, statistics show viewerships from 2018 to 2020 increased from 395 million to 495, and is predicted to grow to 646 by 2023. And when you compare these numbers with the top 10 popular sports, specifically looking at golf, it has 450 million, and you can see that esport viewership has surpassed that number, and there is a huge fan base who supports esports today. And another characteristic of esports is that it includes physical exertion, and this means that injuries can result just like any other sport can. And common injuries include carpal tunnel syndrome, tennis elbow, and tendinitis of the forearm muscles. And the fact that injuries can occur indicates that there is indeed a physical component to esports. Strategy is another one where several coaches and analysts are hired to create gameplays and techniques based on past game data and simulations to get the wins. A typical coaching staff would include several coaches where they take on different tasks in overseeing the team. And just like sports like football and basketball, game plans are made in between and after games, and the players take on roles of the team to get the most effective performances. And to finish it off, we see a common theme in esports with other sports like bowling, golf, pool, and archery, in that they all use fine motor skills. And while we consider these activities as sports without thinking, when we talk about esports, we tend to debate whether or not it can be considered a sport, even when physical exertion levels are similar. And all of these aspects are enough to consider esports as a sport. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least is Donnie. And Donnie, you're looking very much like an esport athlete right now with your headset.
Yeah, I use this to game. Okay. But aside from that, I'm actually against the idea that esports are real sports. The name esport itself, electronic sport, implies that it's in its own category separated from conventional athletic sports. We can make esports competitors more akin to mathletes and chess players and basketball players and football players. While there is a presence of heated competition, there is no presence of overt physical exertion. Competition takes place in hot dog eating contests and spelling bees, yet we do not classify them as sports, and those even take place in the real world. Esports utilization of a virtual world over the real world prevents it from being fitting the idea of conventional sports. There's more mental stress exerted on the participants than there is physical stress. Chess players and people who participate in hot dog eating contests use strategy as well, yet that's not considered a sport. Esports are not real sports. Thank you.
Okay. So that concludes our opening sessions, and so now we'll head into the back and forth. And so I would invite any team member, and actually I forgot to say this at the beginning, but each of you will want to participate in this back and forth portion. And so if you know you're a shyer person, you might want to start off, just know that, I'm nervous about this. So put your voice in early. You can start this conversation, and make sure that you will at least either redirect or you'll respond to the opposing team. And if I don't hear from you, I will start to call on you. So it'd be better if you choose the time that you want to talk than have me
call you out. So with that, I will open up the floor. And audience members, you can also think of questions. We're going to let them go back and forth for a while, and if there's a lull in the conversation before the time is up, then I will ask the audience for questions. So,
I'd like to start off. I'd like to bring up the point that you guys talked about the use of these expensive facilities to hold these esport competitions and to house these athletes. But without those, where would esports be? Because with conventional sports, it's still using they're exerting physical output. You can still pick up a football, play outside, pick up a basketball, go to the courts. But without these giant esports facilities, without these big crowds, are they still considered sports at that point?
So on that topic, I think stadiums and crowds are like very integral to like anyone's definition of a sport. Like you can't have an Olympic weightlifting tournament without a barbell and like weights. So I think those like requiring instruments to like facilitate the actual competition does not mean it's less of a sport. And I also want to go against the idea that I'll let someone else talk.
Kind of on that, crowds aren't needed for sports in the general sense. Let's take the professional aspect out of sports. So like the NFL, professional baseball, all of them, and then professional gaming sports. Let's take the professional out of that. When you see a kid playing with his friends on the street or at a park or something, and he's playing football or he's playing baseball, you're going to consider that a sport. In the back of your mind, he's playing a sport right there. But if my little brother is on the computer or on the Xbox just playing the game all day, he's not playing a sport, he's playing a video game. And I think that's where the distinction needs to come in.
I think you can take a look at both cases and realize that you can play both like as a hobby, and you can also integrate them as a sport. If you look at esports in particular, yeah, you can look at gaming and say that it's generally viewed as a hobby. I can say the same thing about any sort of traditional sport as well. The only real difference is that more traditional sports have a lot of longer history, their establishment compared to esports. Esports is still in its infancy. You still see a lot of leagues popping up, see a rise in popularity in these as well, and there's a growing interest in younger generations that actually enjoy these type of sports in particular. I also want to say that there's plenty of physical, so you associate like baseball, basketball, all these kind of activities with like sport because you've grown up with baseball and basketball being like televised on ESPN and all that. You know, if I go to the gym and I see someone walking on a treadmill, yeah, that's a physical activity that definitely burns more calories than playing a video game does. But at the same time, I don't think that they're participating in the sport. I think they're just exercising, and there's like a big distinction between those two. Yeah, I think the big thing is we're not saying that esports should take on the role of physical activity. I think physical activity is still a critical part in everybody's life, right? I don't think there's any disagreement there. I think we're debating more about the aspect of if esports should be considered a sport. In that regard, I think it should. Minus the physical activity part, I think esports knocks down every other definition of the word sports, and especially with the evolving term, I feel like it should definitely be included as well, looking towards the future.
According to that, then, like I said, should be considered food eating contests and chess sports as well, because those have competition. There's some physical exertion there, but we don't because it doesn't fit the definition we currently have of the word sport.
And back to the whole treadmill thing. So if we threw 35 people into a stadium and gave them a crowd and put them on TV and let them walk on a treadmill for an hour, and pretend it's a competition, are we going to consider that a sport? No, I don't think so, because they're just walking on a treadmill, something we do just every day. And just like I can play video games every day, and like maybe I want to compete, but that doesn't make it a sport. It's just you're adding spectators and the money incentive behind it, but it doesn't make it a sport.
But then again, oh, sorry.
Well, I think that about the competition part you said, like I think the exercise itself is a sport. Walking, there's running competitions, there's triathlons, and if you consider that to esports, the actual playing like the games is a sport, and you're competing against other teams for like the prize money.
I would also like to add that speedrunning is actually an Olympic sport, so I'm just gonna drop that really quick. And Tian mentioned this, but like all sports that everyone knows of like exist on like a continuum of physical exertion, and nobody is trying to argue that like being a like an Olympic weightlifter is as physically, or like a football player is as physically demanding or as taxing on your body as or that video games are as taxing as like football or Olympic weightlifting, but they're like it is on the really like kind of low calorie side of a physical activity, because there are other, and I want to make a comparison to other sports that we like all consider sports. Like there's like competitive pool that's like on, or billiards that's on at ESPN, bowling, darts, golf. All of these things burn very few calories, and the calories that these people actually burn just come from standing. And like I'm sure we can name a lot of people, or one person in particular who like plays golf all the time, and it does not, necessarily mean like it's a really good physical activity.
e スポーツがスポーツかっていうディベート、討論。
Yeah, so I think that like video games are just on the easier end of that spectrum.
Well, according to the Journal of Pediatrics, you burn 40 calories an hour sleeping, 62 calories an hour playing video games. You burn more calories in sex at 82 calories an hour. Darts are at 85 calories an hour. So playing video games is more akin to sleeping than it is to a sport, because that's how sedentary it is.
But the difference between those two, like you're making a comparison between like sleeping and video games, but the comparison between like you mentioned darts and like sprinting is massive. It's like huge. It's way bigger than like the difference between video games and sleeping. So this is like I want to get back to the point where it's like it's a really big continuum, and there's like yeah, I guess that's it.
I do agree on that point, it being a kind of like a broad spectrum of kind of like where we can place it. However, I do believe there's a fine line between like video games being sports versus actual sports.
それ間違いないわ、それ。
Actual sports and like all the activities that we mentioned kind of require more parts of our body, incorporates more parts of our body, like upper body, lower body, whereas video games just kind of require like fine motor skills in our hands and our arms. Other than that, we're not really doing anything else. Physical activity requires like full body skills and even mental motor skills, versus video games just require kind of like mental skills and fine motor skills.
To add on to that, just because there's presence of competition I don't believe necessarily makes it a sport.
I do think it's like typically understated. Like everybody scoffs at like fine motor skills, and like they'll usually compare like video games to like I don't know, like texting or something. And once again, like using your hands, your wrists, and your fingers is not the same as like using your entire body when you're like
making a layup in basketball or something. But people understate the sheer difficulty that some video games, a lot of video games require at the professional level. One statistic that I read was in StarCraft 2 tournaments, professional players reach like individual inputs termed like actions per minute on a keyboard and mouse from 500 to 800 actions per minute. So that means up to 800 individual strokes and motions on a mouse and keyboard every single minute, and divided by 60 seconds, that's a big number. It's like, I think 12 or something. People work for years and years and years in order to become fast enough to produce all these movements accurately. It's not just like they're twiddling their thumbs. These are motor skills that are developed with like a ton of practice and a ton of like hand-eye coordination.
So by the strokes per minute, we could just say that typing competitively can also be just considered a sport just because it requires those same fine motor skills. That's what it seems like.
But the difference between typing and playing different video games would be a lot of them include strategy, and they require coaches to set up plans and rules and how to get like the best results compared to typing where you just type what's on the screen. So I think it's the difference in strategy and like you have to practice in your skill.
Okay, kind of on that point then. To get better at typing, I can get a class, which is basically a coach to get my skills up. I have to type a certain way. I have to use my fingers a certain way. I have to learn how to put my index finger on the little J, I think, has a little notch in the F. I got to strategize how to place my hands and how to get them faster, and I have to practice. And if I want to get really good, maybe I want to be a court reporter. I gotta type 150 words a minute. I'm gonna need to practice every single day to get there. I'm gonna have to sit on my computer. I'm gonna have to type plan how I should practice and get it up there. But we're not gonna call that a sport because I'm practicing at it every day, and because I'm trying to get better at it every day. It's not a sport because of that.
I don't really see anybody trying to make typing into a sport, though. We're not here to argue whether typing is a sport or whether any of these other points that you guys made are sports. We're here to talk about esports in particular. And yes, esports in general, you don't have as much physical activity compared to the other sports. There's no argument about that. However, like your site has also admitted, it includes a lot of mental aspects to the sport. There's lots of strategy involved that's akin to other sports. And yes, you don't include a lot of gross motor sports like in football or any of the other traditional sports. It includes a lot of fine motor skills. And that's more akin to, like we mentioned, golfing, racing, and any other sports. And just to kind of pose the question, would you guys consider those as actual sports? Golfing, archery, anything like that?
Before we start going on to your question, I'll answer that after I bring something back up. You guys are saying that you're not equating like typing and stuff to sports, but Dean just made the argument that, they have to type and get these strokes up to a certain amount of speed and like that, so it makes it a sport. Like you have to practice to get it up there. And I would say that, like if you look at golf and you look at some of these kind of low calorie, low energy expenditure sports, they require your full body, they require your full mind. You need to be present in that situation to participate in it. So I would consider that a sport.
But so on that, nobody's typing against another person. Like there's no like the competition aspect is like really important, and like nobody is like competing with like other people on who types the fastest and like a really big kind of event. And a lot, you mentioned like full body motions, but like a lot of the skills, like the skills that are required, and I'm gonna make a generalization because I don't know too much about these sports, I'll admit that, but like darts is like a singular motion that you're doing repeatedly throughout your entire career is like a darts player. the same thing with like archery. It's like most of archery is just breath control. When you're thinking about like and it's in like a environment that is relatively stable, whereas like in video games, in esports, you're reacting to another person. The inputs that you do on a controller or a keyboard have to like match what the other person is doing. So there's like a two kind of way, it's like tennis and basketball. You're matching what you do to like the other person. So there's like aspects of competition in there from that like head-to-head fight, and that's it.
Well, by that logic, should we consider chess a sport? Because you're reacting to your opponent's moves. You're looking for strategies on how to beat your opponent. But in many cases, we don't consider chess a sport.
I think the comparison between esports and chess is actually a very valid one. The main difference, I would say, is that there's more mechanical skill when it comes to esports. There is more variation in the games that you're playing compared to chess. While both include a predominantly mental aspect, right? Compared to traditional sports, I feel like the increasing amount of mechanical skill that you need to perform actions on a screen for esports actually trumps chess in that regard. And that's why I don't consider chess an actual sport.
I also want to say that I don't think anyone's hands are a limiting factor when they're playing chess, but people's hands are definitely a limiting factor when they're trying to compete in video games. There's plenty of professional players who have had to retire because of wrist injuries. There's one player in particular, a Super Smash Bros. Melee player, who I know that while he was playing, during a motion of one of the techniques that he was doing, he actually completely tore one of his wrist extensor muscles, and he had to get the entire muscle excised from his forearm. And he has to play on a kind of a handicapped sort of controller that resembles more of a keyboard than an actual controller. And people are not necessarily practicing their hand speed when it comes to chess. They're more but they do that in video games. People will practice what they call tech skill or mechanical skill for hours sometimes every day to make sure that so that they don't make any kind of input mistakes with their hands.
Okay, I think we're kind of going in circles in this regard to physical activity, but let's take it out of that and let's kind of go towards a real world versus virtual world. Because in sports, I'm playing against real people. There's no screens around me. I'm not playing a game. I'm hitting a real baseball. I'm catching a real football. I'm throwing a real bowling ball. But when we take it into video games, none of that is happening in the real world. We're doing it on a screen.
Tasha, you were going to say something too. Yeah, I was actually, I think Adam kind of read my mind because I was going to stray off into that concept as well. Kind of piggybacking off of what he was saying, virtual reality, we're kind of put in a box to where we can only control so much, kind of just like the characters that are on the screen. Versus in the real world, we have control over our whole bodies or our own minds, our actions, and things that we say. In virtual reality, we're pretending to be a character, a player or a make-believe fictional character. So it's kind of not really real, or it's kind of a make-believe imagination.
I mean, the controller as an instrument, why is there such a huge difference between a video game controller, which is the instrument that you use to interact with the other person, and a baseball or a barbell or a basketball? You have a little tool that you're using to win the game. Same in both, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, the same thing could be said for, I don't know, maybe a cooking pan or a violin. And we can all compete in situations with those instruments, but that doesn't make it a sport because we're using an instrument to do it. It's happening in the actual dimension of like the real world. We're actually using that sport, or like a cooking pan or something, to do an activity, but it doesn't make it a sport.
メロ声これ通るの好きじゃないんだよな。
I'm also curious if Lena has anything to either talk about here or redirect us, Lena.
I was just gonna talk about kind of like the mental part of esports. So kind of like the same as playing sports in general, gaming can be like very stressful to the point where players individually and as a team and coaches feel the pressure to win, especially on like the esports team. So they use like sports psychologists to that point. So sports psychologists are there to help the athletes perform at their highest level when they're in those like stressful moments. And strategies can differ, but those psychologists talk to athletes individually they talk individually with the psychologist to find out their mental and physical conditions, so the psychologist can support them in becoming a better version of themselves to be able to compete at their highest.
I get where you're coming from with that, but just because psychology is involved doesn't make it sport. Because I can be stressed out doing any type of activity at all. I get stressed out going to work. I don't want to go to work today, but I still got to do it. And I'm not going to get a psychologist to be like, hey, you're stressed out. Like, you need to compete better. Like, the psychology aspect, I get. Like, there is stress playing the game, but that doesn't equate to it being a sport just because you need a psychologist to do it.
I kind of wanted to touch back on the point that Tasha and Adam also made earlier about esports not really having physical aspects to it and how it's supposedly make-believe or imaginary. I just wanted to add that there's nothing in the definition of sports says that there has to be a real-world change. In that regard, you are actually using fine motor skills to manipulate the controller to perform certain actions. Depending on what game you're playing, those inputs can vary in complexity as well. So in that regard, I don't think we can say that just because there's a virtual aspect to it, you can exclude that from the definition of sports.
It's also like a really philosophical question too, like, because I mean the screen is real to me. I can like see it, I can like respond to it in like a very like predictable kind of way. Like it may not be like the things that are happening on the screen may like be projected from like the game's code, but to me that doesn't that's still real. What's going on?
I mean, okay, that's super biased and saying like, oh, that's how you feel. Because I mean, like, this is gonna sound really inappropriate, but like, I can watch porn, but the girl's not touching me. Like, it's not real. Nothing's interacting with me.
But that happened. Like, 32 people filmed that. Like, the actual act was real.
It happened somewhere else, but what I'm seeing isn't real at that point. And we go back and forth all day on this. It's not real. No one's like, I'm not gonna feel it.
Donnie, see what you started? You brought up sex as exercise, and look where Adam took it. And Ian, did you have a question? I didn't know if you had a question for our debaters.
I can wait till the end if it's open to the audience at the end.
What do you think, debaters? Do you want to hear his question, or do you have more to?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
My only question is, again, if you look at sports, if you guys are making the argument for fine motor skills as part of the sports, if you look at generally what the sport is, it contains both fine motor skills and gross motor skills. So how do you guys define that? And also, like the beginning of the argument, it was stated that esports is still like a sport that's proving itself to be a sport. So doesn't that kind of justify that it's not a sport yet?
I
mean, it's proving itself to be a sport because, like, we have to have these conversations, right? Is because, like, we have to convince you guys that it's a sport. And I think there's for sure plenty of things on ESPN and, like, sports that require less fine motor skills. Like, gaming is for sure really heavy on the fine motor skills, but it's also really heavy in, like, coordination and, like, the coordination between your hands and your eyes, your thoughts, and your, like, reaction time. Whereas, like, sure, like, maybe darts has, like, slightly more gross motor skills, maybe not even, but, like, we still, but it has, like, severely less coordination. I don't know that much about darts, I'll admit, but it has severely, like, less coordination. There's less, like, interaction between different parts of the body, and there's less, like, there's no interaction between you and another person as well, which is, like, kind of a hallmark of what we think of when we think of competitive sports like basketball and football.
I agree with that, but the question was basically, you know, since you guys are still proving the fact that it's still a sport, wouldn't it still be considered not a sport until it's proven? And if you're talking about fine motor skills, going back to chess, what do you guys think about time chess matches? Because again, that's a lot more variety that can happen within like, you know, a span of a second. It takes a lot more strategic moves and instrumentation. Oh, don't worry, I got the other team too. Don't worry. So I don't mean to attack this one.
My bro. I would say in regards to specifically the chess argument. Well, actually, let me go ahead and go back to the question that you had earlier. So I did make the point that esports and still is in its infancy. In that regard, I was just saying that it's still kind of on the rise and up, or on the up and up in terms of popularity. It's a growing scene, especially if you look at, you know, the audience participation. Many of the esports athletes, you know, they're starting to make big money across, you know, whatever game that they just decide to play. So that's kind of what I was talking about in reference to it's still being in its infancy. Now, in regards to the chess aspect, I think the key difference is that, especially when you look at esports, I'll use Counter-Strike as an example. You know, everything that's happening on screen, in case anybody doesn't know, Counter-Strike is a first-person shooter, is played competitively. And in the game of Counter-Strike, you know, the goal is to either defuse a bomb or basically take out the enemy team. But the conditions throughout the entire game are constantly in motion. It's relatively complex in the sense that every single round is different. You know, you can't play every round according to what happened in the previous round. Conditions are constantly changing throughout the game, so you have to either adjust your aim or anything like that, depending on what you see. And basically, you have to react real time to whatever visual stimuli that you receive in game. In chess, you don't really get that. Yes, in speed chess, you have to react a little bit faster. But once you place your piece, nothing else is changing. At that point, it's really up to what plan you develop in your mind and executing from that point.
Speed chess has a 2-12 type of time measurement. So I mean, where's the fine line between reaction speed within 12 seconds and reaction speed within Counter-Strike, where you can, you know, where you would have to actually find certain say snipers out in, like, you know, on the gameplay for that. Yeah, but this is a good point though.
First, I want to mention to Ian, like, I 100% agree that to a lot of people, like, esports are not sports. I mean, that's why the discussion is, like, important in the first place, because, like, we have to convince you guys. But another big, like, chess is close to esports for sure, but I think one big issue with that definition is I do play some chess, and people, for the most part, do not intentionally practice the movement and coordination aspects of chess and have to get better at those in order to be successful at the game. I mean, like, for my own personal experience, I play a game called, you guys all know it. It's like Super Smash Brothers Melee, but like in order to like progressively get better at the game, I actually have to like sometimes for an hour like just sit down and practice like advanced techniques just to like be able to move my character properly. Like there's a very intentional like physical improvement that I'm trying to achieve when I get good at video games because of the mechanical skill barriers.
There would be that same progression in chess if you want to make that argument. I mean, I'm not going to be able to just play chess and be good at it without having to progress my skills and get my mental up here to be able to move the chips in a certain, or not chips, I forget what they're called, but the pieces in a certain way. And if I want to like do it competitively, I'm going to need to master like which way goes which way. Or like how can I get you to get checkmate out or whatever it's called. Like I need to practice that. It doesn't just come from me playing once in a while.
Yeah, but you're really practicing the strategy part, and then the like movement part just comes naturally because the strategy part is so hard. Like you're not, when you first start playing chess, you're not going to be like doing crazy moves all across the board because it's going to take you like, I mean, if you're new, then it takes you like 30 seconds just to think about a move. That's way too much time to improve on the actual physical component.
Yeah, but who's to say like the line is drawn right there to say chess is not a sport? Like, oh, I need to be able to practice my hand movements a little more to make it a sport.
I think that goes against the goal of chess, right? The goal isn't to most efficiently move this chess piece from one part of the board to the next. The goal is to, you know, take down the king in the other case. So you don't achieve that goal by efficiently moving your pieces around the map. It's mostly dependent on the mental aspect for chess. You know, you don't see professional chess players, you know, working on, you know, moving your piece from one part of the board to the next as fast as possible. They go more into the strategy behind all of that.
I guess my other question is too for the other team is just the fact that like a sport being considered a sport does it have to include the money that it's producing, and also is it also defined by the media? And if it does get defined by the media, when will it change the definition for an esport to become an actual sport?
I actually think the money behind sports is like what makes them a sport. So like, this conversation wasn't really being had when it was just people Twitch streaming and like competing online, but it was like when ESPN starts getting involved and everyone else starts getting involved, like, hey, let's push this out because people are actually watching them compete. Now we're gonna like start classifying it as a sport because like there's an incentive behind it.
Isn't that kind of true with everything? Like, if I'm just doing a bicep curl at the gym, like, that's not a sport. But if it gets so popular that ESPN starts having bicep curl competitions, like at local gyms everywhere, then I'm probably going to start thinking, okay, that's a sport.
あとでチョコ買いに行こうかな。
Alright, so I hate to interrupt, but we're heading into the closing hour of this part of it, and then we'll head into closing arguments, unless someone just has something that they've been dying to say before we head into closing arguments. Anything that must be said? Alright, and so we've got two closers on each side, and we rock, paper, scissors, or whoever unmics themselves first goes. I'm open to any of those.
I'll go.
All right, Tasha.
Kind of for my side or my part of the argument, I would say esports are not really considered sports due to the concept of the false reality. Virtual reality or the gaming world doesn't compare to the real world because it's kind of like all fantasy. The name itself, it's electronic sports, and it requires little to no effort to participate in. It thrives off of imagination. It's only considered as kind of like mind sports because you're only really using your mind and small use of like intrinsic muscles because there's really no use of full body. Sports require full whole body control, mind control, mental skills,
whereas esports only require mental skills and some like fine motor skills. Electronic competitive gaming doesn't really contribute to the development of the full body. Sports contribute more to the development of the full body because it requires gross motor skills and fine motor skills. And either Nate or Lena.
I can go. So one thing I really want to focus on was so a lot of people are going to make like judgment calls about like why sport is like not healthy and therefore why video games or esports are not healthy, and that's why they may not be suitable as like regular sports. But I think plenty of sports, especially when they're played at a competitive level, are incredibly unhealthy and much more unhealthy than like just playing too many video games. And another thing is like I want to really fight against the fact that there is no physicality involved in esports at all. There definitely is. The physical aspect in sport like exists on a really wide continuum, and on like the really far right, like really physically a lot of physical exertion, you have like strongman, football, sprinting, and then on the far left for sure you have darts, you have archery, and then you have esports. These do not burn a lot of calories, but they require an insane amount of fine motor skills, a ton of coordination between your hands, your mind, a lot of reaction time, a lot of interacting with another person. And I think the most important thing is that it requires a lot of dedicated practice, and a lot of people don't know this. But like people on competitive teams are generally, especially the ones that make a lot of money, are playing up to 12 hours every single day with very little break with coaches so that they can maximize their tech skill and so they can be as effective as possible at manipulating their controllers and the characters that they have in the game. The physical aspect is a huge component. There's plenty of StarCraft players who like will actively practice hand motions in order to improve their tech skill. That's what it's like termed in esports. And it requires years and years of like dedicated practice to improve that. So though it's not as physically demanding, and nobody in this group is for sure going to tell you like, hey, stop going to the gym, just play video games instead, it's a sport. Like nobody is going to say that. But it definitely deserves the kind of recognition that a lot of other competitive sports already gets.
All right. So esports are not sports just because the name is in the title. The process of playing video games, training, and competing are all completely classified as sedentary activities. There's very little physical exertion, which they said, but the definition of sedentary is being somewhat inactive or little physical activity. So it kind of contradicts the idea that competing in video games is a sport because it requires some level of physical exertion. In that sense, there are injuries involved in playing video games. It's physically demanding. The injuries involved in video games like carpal tunnel, gamer's thumb, tendonitis, these are all repetitive overuse injuries, moving the finger and your wrist over and over again. That doesn't qualify you as being physically active. But what's more common in gamers is like the risk for heart disease, colon cancer, high blood pressure, diabetes, and the list goes on because they're performing a sedentary activity, not a sport. You're not going to get diseases from performing an actual sport like running too much. You might get an overuse injury, but you're not going to get colon cancer, high blood pressure, because you're moving and you're doing something that's physically demanding. So esports are not a sport. The line needs to be drawn somewhere, and I think this is where it needs to be drawn.
So to kind of sum our side of how esports is a sport, I'd like to address the benefits, which is pretty similar to playing sports. from improving cognitive and social development, such as hand-eye coordination, attention and visual acuity, solving and strategy skill development, which would be something like fighting for a common goal with your team, and where coaches teach teamwork and effective communication to solve problems, and then achieving a goal to winning, which could boost self-confidence. And player socialization increases, which helps with connecting with friends. There's also collegiate scholarships, in which over 280 colleges feature esports scholarship programs. And gaming can also lead to academic excellence, meaning gaming requires memorization, repetition, and learning, which is essential at the school setting. And it's the same for sports. And gamers have a higher interest rate in STEM subjects and have a stronger average GPA. And lastly, it boosts strategic thinking, such as teamwork, communication, leadership, performance skills, and confidence building.
Okay. All right. So everybody, you can take a deep breath. And you have survived. Hopefully that wasn't too terrible. So audience members,
そりゃそうやん。
we're going to do our
当たり前やん。
time, so I'm going to pull that up.
だってディベートはもう、マジ怖かった。うち2回しか喋ってないし。
All right, so we're going to relaunch, and you're going to vote. Again, hopefully they have convinced you to think differently, and so I'm hoping that we'll see a little bit of movement in the poll here, but let's check it out.
怖いね。もう、シーさんと助けて。怖かったよ。
Correct. Just the audience members.
あはーんって感じ。あはーんって感じ。あーもう怖いよー。やだ、こういうディベートマジで嫌いなよ、うち。はぁ。
Nice, Nate. A little political humor there, for sure. I'm still missing 2 people who voted before.
怖い。で、怖かった。
My numbers are not adding. Oh, one more. Okay, one more person. You can do it. I don't know who you are, and you might not know who you are, but if you voted the first time around, if you could vote again.
マジ嫌いディベート。
I think we have the same numbers that we started with. No? Going once, twice. Alright. It's a little tricky. We've got a
何人
stubborn
のクラス
crowd.
25人のクラス。
Alright,
デ
so
ィベ
we
ートが3回やっ
started
て、
with
1つ目のグループなんよ、うち。
we started with 47% of the class of the audience said yes, esports are sports.
結構半々
And
ね
we。ended with 44%, but only because we're missing somebody. So either one of you voted and you weren't supposed to, one of the debaters. And then the no side, we had 9 to start, or 53%, and 9 to finish. But since we lost one, that number increased a little bit. So it looks like either people didn't budge
もう
much,
半々やな。
or some people changed their minds and it was a wash. So I don't know that we can declare a full winner here.
変わってない、もう
All
半
winners.
々よ。
So let's audience members give them
怖かった、マジで。
hands or a little shout out with
ディ
yeah,
ベ
your
ート嫌い。
emojis there.
本当に嫌い。
A little note in the chat. And then I'd love to hear, first of all, how it was for you debaters. How was it?
怖かった。
Better or worse than you thought?
無理かな。
The only thing I'll say is like the 3 minutes for like an opening closing is probably a little stringent. But I really like the back and forth. I thought that aspect was really cool.
でも見る方はめっちゃ楽しい。
Actually,
喋る
I
の
felt like this one
無事。
smoother than I expected. I thought there was going to be a lot of awkward silences, but everyone was able to like go back and forth a lot and like think on their feet in response to everyone else's arguments.
Yes, I agree, Donnie.
Everyone took it a lot more serious than I expected.
なんか着替えてるし、こいつ。
Yeah, which is what we want.
着替えてる。なんか服か持ってる。
Were any of you caught off guard by your teammates Did you basically get what you expected?
Yeah, I mean, we figured that they were going to hone in on the physical activity aspect, and that's what we kind of prepared for.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I'll agree that that's probably the most questionable aspect for esports and to consider an actual sport. But I still
そう、ドニーって名前と
fits the bill.
ドニーがね、着替えたの。
And oh, sorry, go ahead.
あ、違う、アダムが着替えたんか。
And for those of you who were debaters, were you arguing the side that you really believe, or were you arguing for the other side?
イエスだけど無人だよ。
I
ディ
think
ベートが最
esports
初
should
に
be
嫌いだから。
considered a sport, so it's like kind of weird trying to go against what I'm actually thinking.
Yeah, that's definitely challenging.
Yeah, we all kind of came to a consensus that we believe that esports are sports.
大丈夫？
But we just kind of did like a dice roll on who was gonna.
今日仕事？
Because I think
Nice.
everyone chose the topic because they like esports.
Okay.
今日仕事やんな、多分な。
There was only room for 4
水曜日だもんね。
Right.
やばくない？だってもう8時じゃん。
All right, I'd love to hear from the audience. How was it for you? And any feedback that you'd like to give the debating teams. I'm pretty impressed with Taja that she can drive and.
Yeah, I'm like literally on my way to work right now. That's why.
Well, thanks for dragging us along. It's fun to watch. I always enjoy watching people on the move. So, audience members, how was it? Austin, he's a
頑張
fan.
って。
It was pretty good. Everyone made some pretty good points.
お仕事頑張っ
Talk about the porn watching. I was like laughing so hard.
I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't expecting that. So yeah, well played.
Indeed, I was also not expecting that.
もう今 e スポーツ関連のこといっぱいしすぎてわけわかんなくなる。
We know a side to Adam we didn't before. All right. Any other comments? Definitely, you have some fans in the chat here. Exposed himself. Very nice. Yes, this is definitely rated R, PG-13. Where are we? I don't know. Definitely adult audience for
Rated
sure.
R.
So, good times. Any other feedback? So our next debate is on Thursday, and I forget what our topic is. I flipped my.
日本
But
人のゲー
anyway.
ムはみんな読んでるけど、間違いないな。
All right. And any questions, comments? So now that you're done, your job is to come back and support your classmates as they are debating, and you get to be the audience member and weigh in your opinions as well. So we actually ended a little bit early since we got through discussion. Any other comments, questions, complaints? I know it's that time of day, it's that time of the semester. Rough times, but we are almost there. And we've got Thanksgiving break. Not that it's a break for anybody, right? You're basically eating a TV dinner at home for Thanksgiving, maybe, since we're not supposed to be spreading the COVID germs. And
そう、なんかうち聞いたところでさ、コロナがまた広まってるから年末まで自粛でまた出るかもしれないって。
all right. Thanks, team. Thanks, our first debaters, for setting a
いや、これファイナルじゃない。この後にまだファイナルあると思うよ。あるある。12月の10日にまたファイナルがある。
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Peace out.
なんか大きいプロジェクトみたいな感じ。マジもうやっと終わった。やっと終わった。やっと終わった。もう、だるいってー。本当に。そうそうそう。うちももうファイナルとかやばいよ。 うち今週テストが3つあって、2つか。テスト2つあって、来週に課題が、リスポンスペーパーが1つあって、でも来週サンクスギビングブレイクなのにさ、サンクスギビングブレイクなのに提出するものがあるってマジやばいと思うんだけど、先生。何考えてるか全然わかんない。で、12月に入って、またグループプレゼンテーションが2つぐらいあるんだよね。で、3日と8日にあるんだけど、撮ってる先生が同じだから、3日と8日にワンチャン2つ入るかもしれない、どっちかに。けど、わかんない。で、オンラインライティングとかもあるしさ。てか、リスポンスペーパーはうち、来週1つでしょ。1つずつでしょ。でっかいプロジェクトみたいなのがリスポンスペーパーが2つあって、で、あとグループプロジェクトが2つあって、で、パワーポイントプレゼンテーションが1つあるけど、それは授業でプレゼンしなきゃいけないわけじゃないから、今のは、social issues of sports かな ?social issues in sports で、なんかいろんな、あれがあって、先生がいろいろ質問を、なんか、考えたんかわからんけど、考えたんだろうね、自分で。で、多分6個7個ぐらいあったんかな。6個7個ぐらいあって、で、その中から自分が好きなやつを選ぶんだけど、早いもん勝ちみたいなやつだったから、ちょうど e スポーツ、今仏さんのやつで、e スポーツ関連のこと調べてるから、ちょうどいいやと思って、あれにした。e スポーツはスポーツなのかっていう討論のトピックにしたんだけど、他のが一応決まって、今のところ決まってるのが、What's most important for sport success, the mind or body? と Can anyone become a professional athlete? で、1万時間経ったらって何のかよくわかんないけど、なんか1万時間ルールみたいなのがあるらしい。興味深いね、そう。こういうディベートとか聞くのはね、うち楽しいよね。楽しくて聞き入ってしまうから、自分で参加するってなったら、やだーってなる。本当に苦手なんよね。人の前で話すのが本当に苦手すぎて。なんかリアルタイムでさ、なんか電話とかは別にいいよ。電話だったりさ、こういう配信とかってさ、全然、なんか慣れてるけど、ズームとかってなると人の顔も見れるし、なんか、うち英語もそこまでさ、自信ないから、マジで怖えんだよ。本当に、焦る、ビビる、怖い。で、グループプレゼンとかもうち本当に苦手だしさ、どうしようって感じなんだけど。なんかまた課金したいっていうか、なんかしたい。お金入れたい。なんかに。オレオからなんか来た。リンさんお世話になりますって来たけど、うち全然活動してないで、ボットレベルで。あ、そうだ、スティーブさんに言わなきゃいけないことがある。英語自信ないよ。ないよ。ない。そんなんない。若干遅延入ってるのすんごい嫌なんだけど、これ。なんか30秒ぐらい遅延入ってる。報酬は入社後、平行線で、東京は愛せど、何もない。2件6をちょうだい。とっとこらい太郎になってるし。何や、とっとこらい太郎って。ちょっと待って、コメント整理したい。誰を一番上にするかはね、とても迷うよね。 と、個人的に上に置いときたいのが、パピンさんと、パチージさん、ヒカさん、エイトさんとココさん、ジンポンさん。もうお気に入り多すぎて。言わなきゃいけないことない。配信で言うことではない。配信で言うことじゃない。配信で言うことでないから、後で言うわ、LINE で。パパパパンパン、パンパンパン。どうしよっかな。パピエンさんと、とりあえず、お気に入りと、本当に配信で言うようなことじゃないんだよ、マジで。多分、ってなるからダメ。ジンポンさん、ココさん、さん、ヒカさん、パピエさん。あ、頼朝さんもおった。ああ、ウルフさんもいた。ああちょっと待って。なると、違う。これでしょ。で、ライタロと、ウルフさん、頼朝さん、もしかしてだけど、俺のことを誘ってるんじゃないの？中国に引っ越すとかなわけないでしょ。バカかよ。なわけないでしょ。引っ越すんだったら日本だわ。やば、パッチージさんが204日もやってる。もうやばいよ。あと150日したらもう365日や。えぐいって。でもね、とても悲しい報告なんかな。わかんないけど、人それぞれによって捉え方は違うけど、うちにとってはちょっと悲しい。悲しいっちゃ悲しい。まあね、悲しいね。とりあえず悲しいね。もしかしてだけど、てかもう授業終わったくらいじゃ配信切ってもいいんだけど。でも暇だったからみんなからコメント欲しかったってね、かまちしただけなんだけど。ただそれだけなんだけど、終わるかね。もう終わるかね。配信終わりにすっかね。買い物行きたいんだよね。外に出たい、また。昨日外出たばっかだけど、また外に出たい。から、片付けたら終わりじゃないよ。終わって片付けして出かけますか？今バイトしてなくてさ、いろいろ買い物行ってるから、親がお小遣いあげるよって言ったからお小遣い帳買いに行かなきゃいけない。てか、ワンチャンお小遣い帳ってさ、あれよね。オンラインでお小遣い帳テンプレ。これでさ、なんか小さいファイルとかにしてさ、ワンチャン使えるよな。ということで、今日の配信終わりにしたら面白かったらチャンネル登録よろしくお願いします。ではまた。バイチャ。超適当。